Okay, let's jump right into this explainer and completely shift our mindset. For years, the auditing world has honestly treated environmental management systems like a static list of chores. You check a box over here, you sign a form over there, and you call it a day. But today, we're breaking that habit. Drawing directly on the insights from Module 26, Chapter 3, we're moving away from auditing isolated ISO 14001 clauses. Instead, we're going to focus on evaluating the environmental management system as a living, interconnected organism. We're looking specifically at the really powerful relationship between Annex A.7 and Annex A.8, and how combining these two transforms a basic, boring compliance check into a truly systemic, value-driven evaluation.
So think about this. Why do environmental incidents happen even when the paperwork is absolutely perfect? It's a paradox that drives auditors crazy, right? And it highlights a really dangerous vulnerability we call the silo trap. Imagine walking into a facility as a lead auditor. You sit in a pristine conference room, and the management team hands you this beautifully formatted binder. It's got flawless procedures, signed training logs, impeccable job descriptions. On paper, they look completely compliant. But then, you walk 50 feet out onto the factory floor, and you find a hazardous waste drum actively leaking into a floor drain, simply because the operator had absolutely no idea why the procedure in that binder actually mattered. Perfect documentation completely failed to match the operational reality. Today, we're figuring out exactly how to audit that specific gap.
Here's our roadmap for today's explainer. We'll cover the silo trap, Annex A.7, Annex A.8, auditing their intersection, some real-world scenarios, and finally, the systemic auditor.
Starting with Section 1, the silo trap.
The reality is, auditing clauses in isolation creates a total false sense of security where perfect records hide a flawed reality. We fall into this trap because, frankly, checking paperwork is easy. Reality, on the other hand, is messy. If an auditor just checks a training attendance sheet under one clause on Monday and then separately checks a machine's maintenance log under a completely different clause on Tuesday, they're missing the entire picture. They might totally miss the fact that the operator running that machine has zero underlying understanding of the environmental impact of their daily tasks. That false sense of security is exactly where hidden systemic flaws thrive. It just completely fails to reveal whether an organization actually has the capability to sustain long-term environmental improvements.
Moving to Section 2, Annex A.7, the support engine.
Annex 8.7 represents the enabling infrastructure of the EMS. It encompasses competence, awareness, communication, and documented information required to sustain environmental performance. Think of this support engine as the soil, the water, and the sunlight in a garden. By themselves, they aren't the actual plant, but without them, literally nothing can grow. Support mechanisms aren't just administrative burdens. They are the vital conditions that translate a company's high-level environmental policy into something that can actually survive operational reality. Without robust organizational support, an environmental policy is nothing more than polite words on a page.
Let's break down how this enabling infrastructure actually works in practice. Competence goes way beyond just formal training attendance. If you're auditing a facility, you shouldn't just ask an operator for their training sign-in sheet. You need to ask them, hey, what actually happens to the local river ecosystem if this specific valve is left open? Because if personnel lack an understanding of the environmental implications of their actions, even the most sophisticated technical job descriptions won't prevent an incident. Awareness is all about connecting daily actions to environmental consequences. Add in transparent communication processes and documented information to act as a structural backbone against, say, employee turnover, and you've got yourself a resilient support engine.
Which brings us to Section 3, Annex A, operational execution.
Annex 8.8 is the systematic management and execution of processes, including operational planning, life cycle perspective, outsourced processes, and emergency preparedness. If the support mechanisms from A.7 are the soil and water, while A.8 is the muscle and bone, this is where the magic happens. Operational control is the structured physical mechanism that ensures environmental objectives are achieved and pollution is actively prevented. It's the tangible safeguard on the factory floor, the actual dials, limits, and physical barriers that stop a theoretical risk from becoming a real-world disaster. So operational control isn't merely administrative, it dictates actual process limits, technical specifications, and emergency readiness. It involves risk-based process control, integrating lifecycle thinking, overseeing external providers, and proactive emergency preparedness. Lifecycle thinking is particularly fascinating here. An effective EMS doesn't just ask how much energy a product uses while it's being assembled in the factory, it asks what happens to the plastic components when the end user throws it away 10 years later. Furthermore, A.8 requires strict environmental oversight of external contractors. It ensures that an organization can't just quietly outsource its pollution to a third party.
Section 4. Auditing the crucial intersection. We've reached the climax of our explainer, and really, the core of Module 26, Chapter 3. This is the crucial intersection where we evaluate the connective tissue between worker competence and actual process controls. Let's contrast these two sides. Imagine having a highly motivated, environmentally conscious team that's been thoroughly trained. That is excellent support. But if management gives them absolutely no operational process limits or physical safeguards on their equipment, that equals failure. Good intentions cannot stop a chemical reaction. Now flip it. Imagine having brilliant engineering controls and flawless documented guidelines for your chemical tanks. Excellent operational control, right? But if the staff running those tanks is completely untrained, stressed out, and unaware of what happens if they ignore the alarms, that equals disaster. One literally cannot survive without the other.
When you step into a facility as an auditor, this is your fundamental step-by-step logic for uncovering whether procedural guidance actually dictates operational behavior. Step 1, verify the competence and support capability. Step 2, review the documented operational controls. But Step 3 is where the real auditing happens. You must observe the operational discipline where those two overlap out in the real world. Observation is the hardest, yet absolutely most critical part of an audit. You have to physically see the human being and the machine working together to confirm that organizational support mechanisms directly enable and sustain effective operational control.
Section 5. Real-world audit scenarios. Let's ground this theory in reality by walking through a few different industries. In the automotive industry, an auditor will look at energy awareness programs. That's the support evidence. But to prove it actually works, the auditor has to immediately pivot to the factory floor to check if the heavy machinery is actually regulated and maintained on schedule to reduce that energy use. In waste management, you check if external contractors received environmental orientation, sure, but then you cross-reference that by physically inspecting the documented waste transport logs to ensure they didn't just illegally dump the material. The support evidence has to dynamically link to the operational evidence.
Let's look closely at the pharmaceutical example. Say a pharma worker passes all their chemical handling training with flying colors. The A.7 evidence looks fantastic. But then you pull the operational storage temperature logs for the chemical holding area and you see constant unexplained temperature deviations. Well, you haven't just found a minor paperwork error. You've found a systemic gap between support and execution. If those temperature logs deviate, hazardous waste could become dangerously volatile. The training on paper says they're competent, but the operational log proves the execution is undisciplined. A systemic auditor writes this up as a failure of the intersection, targeting the root cause rather than just issuing a little slap on the wrist for a bad temperature log.
Section 6. The systemic auditor.
True environmental capability requires a perfect balance. You're looking at 50% support mechanisms and 50% operational execution. When things go wrong in a facility, corrective actions have to address both the human competence gaps and the technical process deficiencies simultaneously. Because if a machine malfunctions and causes a spill, and the company only fixes the mechanical valve but never retrains the operator on emergency response, that underlying risk is still there. Conversely, if they heavily train the operator but leave a flawed leaking valve in place, the problem is absolutely going to happen again. Treating a symptom without treating the human root cause pretty much guarantees a repeat offense.
Ultimately, you are auditing one single integrated management system, not a fragmented checklist of independent compliance points. ISO 14001 is a unified ecosystem. When you pull on a thread in the training department, you should be able to watch it move a physical gear out on the production line.
Environmental performance depends on both human capability and disciplined operational execution. Support processes have no value unless connected to operational execution. This core philosophy is what separates a superficial documentation review from a truly systemic, value-driven environmental audit. It's exactly how you evaluate whether environmental performance results from deliberate, interconnected system design rather than just isolated strokes of luck. So the next time you walk onto a facility floor, don't just look at the paper in the binder, and don't just stare at the physical machines. Look at the invisible bridge between them. How will you connect the dots between the training room and the factory floor on your next facility walkthrough? Keep this provocative thought in mind and always hunt for that vital link between organizational support and disciplined execution. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and I'll catch you next time.